So I'd like to welcome everyone to this IAVI webinar. I'm delighted that we're looking at youth volunteering evidence into action learning from research. And I want to just set out a little bit of context for why we're doing this. Many of you on the call may already realize that IAVI continues to have a strategic interest in youth volunteering and the key issues that are challenging young people today. And in 2023, we're holding a series of 4 webinars on the theme of youth volunteering and social change. And to support those themes, we have actually created a number of challenge papers and insights paper written by an academic, Dr. Chris Malora. And Gal from IAVI will actually put the links to those papers in the chat so that you can have access to them in case you haven't already seen them. But alongside that, we are very conscious of the fact that organizations actually across the globe, particularly those leadership organizations that are part of IAVI's network, are also conducting their own research in their own countries, and that research has learning and information and knowledge that deserves to be shared on a global stage. So we were delighted when Volunteer Scotland produced a piece of research this year that we felt would very much be something in line with what IAVI is currently looking at in terms of youth volunteering. What are the trends? What are the challenges? How can we as volunteer leaders and volunteering organizations respond to what young people want and need, and to encourage them and motivate them and enable them to take part in volunteering? So, as I said, we're delighted today to showcase Volunteer Scotland's research, and for us to also bring together a global panel who will be able to give their thoughts and experience on how does the evidence from the research resonate from them, and indeed what trends are they finding in relation to youth volunteering within their own countries. So today's moderator is Alan Stevenson, the Chief Executive Officer of Volunteer Scotland. And Alan has worked within senior management positions within Volunteer Scotland for more than 8 years. And he regularly represents the interests of volunteers and persuades third sector and public sector leaders of the value and role in delivering volunteering for all. I mean, I think that's really important for all of us to gain recognition and value for volunteering. So we're delighted that Alan is our moderator today, and it only stands for me now to hand over to Alan and to know that it will be a very informative and highly enjoyable session. Thank you, Alan.
Thank you, Wendy. So I'll do the bit of introducing the topic, and then I'll get on to introducing the panel members and our presenter today as well. So good morning, good afternoon, and evening, wherever you are, and most of all, welcome to this IAVI Evidence into Action session focused on youth volunteering. I'll be a moderator for this session, and I'll help to navigate us through the agenda and take us into what I think is going to be a really exciting and interactive session today. So today we'll be exploring trends in youth volunteer participation in Scotland. We'll look into youth participation and youth volunteering demographics, looking at age, gender, health and disability, deprivation, even faith, amongst other characteristics. We'll also hear about the types of youth volunteering activities that take place to a greater or lesser degree in Scotland, as well as what the routes into volunteering are for our young people. Young people get many benefits from volunteering: new skills, knowledge, social connections, but also personal and attitudinal benefits as well, benefits that stand them in good stead in future and for their future as well. So it's something they draw on later on, thinking about confidence, thinking about self-reliance and resilience, and we'll discuss some of these benefits. Finally, we'll look at the incentives and encouragements that might attract more young people into volunteering. As Wendy's mentioned, this information was recently published in our Young People in Volunteering in Scotland report, and it's available from our website, and I think we've sent a link across already. So we've drawn on implications from these findings for ourselves and our stakeholders in Scotland in terms of what are the implications, what we're going to do about what we're finding out. With all of this said, today I think is about much more than this. we'll also have the unique opportunity to compare notes across our countries and regions. We can genuinely share experiences and learn from each other through hearing first from the perspectives from first our panel members, but also through your inquiry today. There's an opportunity for you to ask questions and hopefully find some answers that are relevant to your own context. Volunteers are the lifeblood of volunteering. They are our future, and that's why I think we're all here today. So now let's meet your first presenter and the rest of the panel. So ignoring me at the top, thank you, Wendy, for introducing me. Debbie is going to be taking on the main presentation today, and that presentation will stimulate the panel session. So a bit about Debbie. Debbie Maltman, I've known for a few years now. As a research officer at Volunteer Scotland, Debbie works on quantitative analysis largely and enhances the knowledge of volunteer participation across Scotland. Over the last 4 years, she's published research on youth volunteering, the characteristics of adult volunteer participation, analyses NCVO's time well spent data for Scotland, which gives us information on the experience of volunteering, and also has been very busy looking at the impact of first COVID-19 and now the cost of living crisis, which really highlights the critical role of volunteering, but also shows some of the pressure that volunteering is under right now. So a lot of what we find in Debbie's research is touching on issues such as mental health, physical health, social isolation and loneliness. So we're going to hear from Debbie in a second. But before that, I'll introduce you to our panel members. So we're lucky enough to have Ahmed El-Zoubi. Ahmed is the Director of Community Outreach, the Crown Prince Foundation, as well as the founder and CEO of, I'm going to get this wrong, Ahmed, of Nour, a not-for-profit social impact platform that aims to promote a culture of giving and philanthropy by connecting civil society actors within a common framework for measuring impact. Nour has established a national standard for giving, facilitating over $5 million in donations to over 150 projects, and has directly impacted over 650,000 individuals. It's incredible, the scale. Nour was officially launched in 2018 as an initiative of the Crown Prince Foundation in 2019, and in partnership with UNICEF, the National Platform for Youth Engagement and Volunteering. Nano was launched, which hosts today over 70,000 registered users and has conducted over 600,000 volunteer hours. It's quite astounding, actually. So we'll be lucky enough to hear from Ahmed in due course. And someone I know very well, Denise. I think we're on many calls together, actually. Denise is actually on holiday today, so I think it's a big thanks for Denise for coming along. And Denise is a wealth of knowledge for me and others across the UK and elsewhere. Denise is Chief Executive of Volunteer Now in Northern Ireland, and she's been in that role since 2017. Denise has extensive experience in public and organisational volunteering policy development, local volunteering infrastructure engagement, volunteering research, supporting good practice in volunteering. Most notably, young people in volunteering is a key area for Denise, but also older people in volunteering and events volunteering. So Denise has knowledge of and expertise in working with volunteers and volunteering issues gained over many years in the sector, in the voluntary and community sector. Now on to Maria. Jose Cascante Matamoros holds a degree in political science from the University of Costa Rica. And Maria, I've just come back from Costa Rica, so it's a wonderful place. Master in Latin American Studies and PhD in Rule of Law and Global Governance from the University of Salamanca in Spain. Her areas of publication and research are political parties, electoral system, gender and public opinion. Maria is currently a professor and researcher at the University of Costa Rica and Vice Chancellor of Student Life, and it's probably in that role that we'll hear from most from the experience that Maria has. So this office is also home to the university's volunteer programme. The volunteer programme at the University of Costa Rica has 25 years of history, allowing students to develop skills while giving back to society. And last but not least, we've got Kuli Yona. And Kuli is Executive Director at Yes Empowerment Services in Uganda. Before taking on the role of Executive Director, Kuli served in different capacities as a Programmes Manager at Yes Empowerment Services. And Kuli's previously worked as a Community Development Field Supervisor at Young and Powerful Initiative South. I'm going to get this wrong again. Zvenzori Anglican Diocese and Finance and Administrator Agape of Hope Female Youth Development Association. I'm probably right in saying that Cooley has been very much involved in youth volunteering, and youth volunteering is probably a lot of what volunteering is in Uganda. So Cooley is highly experienced at mobilising and publicising volunteering work, creating partnerships and collaborations, enhancing volunteering strategies, leadership and governance, and for the last 6 years has been at the forefront in disaster response and preparedness, especially around the floods and landslides around Mountain Rwenzori in Uganda. And that's my hard bit, isn't it? Going through all of those fantastic profiles of our panel, great panel today. So that just leads me to set up Debbie in terms of the presentation on young people and volunteering in Scotland. So this really is about stimulating the panel discussion. So Debbie's going to be disseminating the research findings and going in to all of that detail that we've just discussed. As I said, Debbie's our chief number cruncher and research designer. And Debbie, I think you're also going to be on the panel. So it's over from me to Debbie.
Need to help if I unmuted myself. Thank you, Alan. So as Alan mentioned, I'm a research officer at Volunteer Scotland. The Young People in Scotland survey that we undertook is our most recent publication and genuinely one of my favourite. Today we're going to cover a bit of a research overview just to let you understand a little bit about what the Young People in Scotland survey is. We're going to have a look at some trends in youth volunteer participation within Scotland, some of the different demographic trends that we're seeing, as Alan mentioned. We're going to look at the formal youth volunteering activities. So what activities are young people involved in? And there's some really interesting data in there around some changes we've seen. We're going to have a look at the routes into formal youth volunteering. So who is it that helps people young people get started in their volunteering journey? We're going to have a look at the wide benefits, both to the young person in terms of kind of personal benefits of having fun, and then career benefits as well. We're going to have a little bit of a look at the encouragements to engage in youth volunteering, and there's really tangible outcomes here as to what we could do in Scotland to encourage more young people to step forward and volunteer. Then we're going to conclude some of the findings and do a little bit of evidence into action. As the first part of our presentation, we'll look at research overview. So a little bit of the background. At Volunteer Scotland, we commissioned some questions in the Ipsos Young People in Scotland survey. Around 1,500 young people of secondary school age, which is 11 to 18 in Scotland, participated in the survey. It took place in 24 local authorities, and just to put that into context, there's 32 local authorities in Scotland. So we got really good coverage from a really wide range of areas. The survey is completed online in school, and it was completed from September to December last year. It's weighted by key demographic factors, and that's to ensure that the sample is representative of young people in Scotland. It's important for us to note that the analysis by deprivation, so Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation Quintiles, it's based on the pupil's home postcode and not the postcode of the school attended. And why that's important to us is that we don't want big chunks of young people from a school postcode that might be in a different deprivation profile to their own. We want to look at the young person. We supplemented the results with some secondary data sources, and there's some definitions we just need to go through for today's presentation. So in Scotland, we define formal volunteering as volunteering or unpaid help that's given through a group, a club, a charity, or another organisation, and its aim is to help other people or to help a cause or the environment. Informal volunteering refers to unpaid help that's given as an individual, so there's no organisational involvement, and it's given directly to people who are not relatives. Non-volunteers refers to young people who don't volunteer either formally or informally. Total volunteering is the total number of young people who volunteered, and it's made up of those that formally volunteer, those that informally volunteer, and we've got a number of young people which do both types of volunteering, which is really encouraging. Total formal volunteering refers to the number of young people who formally volunteer in their school time, in their spare time outside of school, and again, a number of young people do both. If we have a look at a kind of snapshot of 2022, we can see that for formal volunteering, 37% of Scottish young people gave time to formally volunteer in 2022. It's interesting to note that 22% of young people didn't know if they'd formally volunteered, and that's something we'll come on to later around education around volunteering. It's quite encouraging to see that 20% of young people don't formally volunteer, but they would like to do so in the future. And again, we'll come on to that a little bit later. For informal volunteering, the participation rate was lower at 18%. The percentage that didn't know if they formally volunteered jumped to 37%. So again, we've got some what's happening, why don't young people understand what informal volunteering is? And encouragingly, again, we've got 21% of young people who don't informally volunteer, but they would like to in the future. So it's a fifth of young people have said that they would like to formally volunteer in the future, and just over a fifth have said they would like to informally volunteer in the future. We move on to the next slide. If we have a look at trends in youth volunteer participation, and we have two survey years that we can use for comparison, 2019, which was before the COVID-19 pandemic, and 2022, which is the most recent survey year. What we found is that total youth volunteering declined by 12% between 2019 and 2022. We saw a smaller decrease in total informal youth volunteering. It fell 7% from 25 to 18%. And if we move on to have a look at formal participation. Sorry, Alan, I'm trying to control your slides, but it's not moving. Thank you. So we have a look at total formal volunteering. We can see that it fell from 49% to 37%. The bit of data that we're missing that I would have loved to have had was what happens, how low did youth volunteer participation get during COVID-19? But what we can see is post-COVID-19, cost of living crisis we're in now, youth volunteering participation has fallen. But we have to remember that that's still 114,000 Scottish young people, and they've given 9.7 million hours of help to others through volunteering in 2022, which is just incredible. If we break that down into formal volunteering inside and outside of school, we start to see a really interesting trend where volunteer participation in school time has fallen 5%, but volunteering for young people in their own spare time fell 13%. And that's quite a big drop and quite a big disparity. So we can see that the decrease in formal volunteering is mainly coming from volunteering in young people's spare time rather than school time. We have a look at the next slide. This shows a breakdown of some of the different demographic trends that we've seen within Scotland. For age, there's quite a big range when we look at age ranges in the formal volunteer participation rates. So for young people aged 11 to 12, so that's our starting age for secondary school within Scotland, the formal volunteer participation rate's 22%. For those aged 17 to 18, so as young people approach school leaving age, that jumps up to an amazing 68%. For informal volunteer participation, the differential's less. So for those people just entering secondary school aged 11 to 12, it's 16%. And for those ready to just leave secondary school aged 7 to 18, it's 22%. For deprivation, Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation Quintile 1, so that's young people that live in the 20% most deprived areas in Scotland, their volunteer participation rate formally is 28%. that increases 10% if we move on to the 20% least deprived areas in Scotland. And there's a concerning trend in Scotland for both young people and adults that as you move from the most deprived to the least deprived area, as we move through those 5 quintiles, volunteer participation increases. What's really interesting for young people in terms of deprivation, if we look at informal volunteering, there's no real variation by deprivation. So we're not seeing this staggered increase from like quintile 1 to 2 to then 3 to then 4 to 5. So perhaps there's something here that we can learn. If we look at disability, disability is classed as young people having a long-term health condition, and that can be a physical health condition, a mental health condition, an illness or disability that's expected to last 12 months or more. And what's amazing for young people is that those disabled young people that have so the equivalent of having a long-term health condition, both formally and informally have higher volunteer participation rates than young people without a long-term health condition. We can see formally 48% of young people with a long-term health condition are volunteering. Those without, it drops down to 39%. Informally, 28% of young people with a long-term health condition are volunteering. And for young people without a health condition, that drops down to 18%. Another demographic group that we looked at was faith groups, and we'll come on to this a little bit more in our conclusions. For formal volunteering, we find that those young people of a Christian faith have the highest participation rates at 43%, while other faith groups came in with the lowest formal volunteer participation rates of 32%. Informally, non-Christians interestingly had the highest participation rates at 23%, and Christians had the lowest volunteer participation rates at 19%. So there's some real interesting difference there by faith groups for young people. If we move on to the next slide. This slide shows the number of different areas that young people are formally volunteering in 2022. So we can see that the top 2 are young people supporting other young people, and that's inside schools and outside schools. The most important and biggest change for us in Scotland has been around physical activity, sports and exercise. In 2022, 27% of young formal volunteers volunteered within this area. This is quite a big change for us in Scotland. Physical activity, sports and exercise was the most supported volunteer activity type over a wide number of years. There's been quite a big decrease in this area. And that's something we'll have a little bit more of a breakdown on the next slide. So we wanted to have a look at where youth volunteer participation in terms of the types of activities that are undertaken, how that changed between 2019 and 22. And as you mentioned, we've seen big changes in physical activity, sports and exercise. There's a 12% decrease. So in 2019, it's the highest youth volunteer participation at 39%. By 2022, we saw that drop to 27%. So it's now the 3rd most supported area, and it's gone from the highest. That's a really interesting finding for us. Although we're missing kind of what happened during COVID, it could be a kind of bit of a COVID hangover. In Scotland, restrictions around participation in physical activity, sports and exercise. That was kind of the last area. Sports halls, yoga studios, they were the last that had the restrictions lifted. So people were slower to return to those in terms of undertaking them as an activity, and that could have led to kind of a slower return to volunteering in that area. And that's something that we'll be really keen to keep an eye on over the next survey. On the next slide, we have a look at the different activity types in 2022 by gender. And the reason that we got a bit excited by this data is the blue circle. So activities with higher female participation. And you can see at the top, it's physical activity, sports and exercise. So it's to say that there's more females volunteering in this area formally than males. This is the first time we have ever seen this in Scotland. In the last survey in 2019, we had an equal proportion of boys and girls volunteering in sports and exercise. Prior to that, male participation rate in this area was always higher and always had been. So there's a real interest in and a real kind of sea change in this area. We could see that young girls are supporting other children or youth groups inside and outside of schools, older people. Male participation rates are higher in some areas, though. Young males are more involved in their local community or neighbourhoods, in culture and heritage, religion and belief, and online volunteering. We have a look at the next slide. This covers routes into formal volunteering. So young people were asked who encouraged them to formally volunteer. We can see at the top that it's parents or guardians. It's 42% of young people said that parents or guardians were the ones that encouraged them and really got them started in volunteering. That's fallen 4% from 2019. We didn't see too much change in other areas, other routes into formal volunteering, but something that got us quite interested was the category of no, I did it without any encouragement. In 2019, it was 10% and it increased 2% to 12% in 2022. So not a big change just in that survey on survey movement. But when we looked back at 2006 from our first data that we have, it was 6%. So over the period from 2006 to 2022, we've seen a doubling of young people just starting out volunteering on their own without anyone giving them any encouragement to do so. And that's a really encouraging finding. For young people that were encouraged from someone from a scheme, so that's kind of a scheme or programme. So we have Saltire Awards in Scotland, Duke of Edinburgh Awards. And we're seeing that 12% of young people are currently being encouraged into formal volunteering by schemes. We've seen some real benefits from the Saltire Awards, and we think we need to reflect on that programme success a bit more. And we need to work out how we can promote youth volunteering and how we can extend that programme further. And that's one of the things that we're going to do following this survey. We have a look at the next slide. We come on to the wellbeing benefits of formal youth volunteer participation. And this makes me so happy to see young people having such a wide range of wellbeing benefits. Young people are having fun, they're seeing their confidence increase, they're feeling part of a team, they're making new friends, they're feeling they've made a difference, appreciated, happier, better about themselves. And that's just the top ones. It's just amazing to see that young people are benefiting from formal volunteering, their wellbeing benefits. On the next slide, we can see that young people also benefit from career benefits a lot. So 46% of young people who formally volunteer say that they've learned new skills. 27%, so over a quarter, have learned about becoming a leader. Young people are learning how to overcome challenges. I think really importantly, they've got an increased understanding of just what they can achieve. They're improving job prospects and study prospects. Unfortunately, the next slide is it makes me sad. So between 2019 and 2022, although young people are still reporting benefits from formal volunteering, there's been a decrease in the proportion of young people citing every single benefit. So we're seeing fewer young people say they feel happier, feeling appreciated, and it's the same for career benefits. So although a high proportion of young people are still citing these benefits, it's a lot lower than in 2019. And we've got two working hypotheses around this data. The first is that the volunteering roles during COVID and now moving out of the pandemic for young people are a bit more limited than pre-pandemic, and there's maybe less scope to derive wellbeing and career benefits, and that's something we need to understand more. I think more concerningly, the mental health impact of COVID, the war in Ukraine, and now the cost of living crisis It might have compromised young people's ability to derive health and wellbeing benefits from volunteering. And I'm sure as many people on this call, there are concerns around the mental health impacts of COVID-19 and the cost of living crisis on young people. And that's something we're really going to have to keep an eye on over the next few years. We have a look at the next slide. This is what young people are asked, what would encourage you to engage in formal volunteering? So that's 20% of young people who don't formally volunteer, but who have said they would like to do so in the future. There's some real things here that are really tangible that we could do. People have said they would formally volunteer if they could do it with their friends, if they could volunteer in something that was an interest or importance to them. They wanted to know that they would be making a difference. Importantly, they wanted to know if it fitted around their other commitments like schoolwork and studying. And there's an opportunity here for under 16s. Young people said they would be encouraged to volunteer if they knew more about opportunities available for under 16s. And young people also want to know if they're going to be fully supported during their volunteering, which is really important. If we look at the encouragements to engage in informal volunteering on the next slide, it's pretty much a mirror image in terms of what young people are looking for. If we move on to the next slide. So we think there's real opportunities here. And what we want to do from this is turn the evidence into actions. We feel there's real opportunities to increase both formal and informal volunteering. And there's three main ways we want to look at this. We want to consider the inclusion of volunteering in the national curriculum. So the national curriculum in Scotland is what young people learn. We want to include volunteering in that. We want to make sure that every young person in Scotland fully understands what volunteering is, what it entails, and how they can benefit from it. We want to look at a campaign that could debunk some of the concerns young people have around formal volunteering. So we want young people to understand that it's flexible around the time commitment involved. We need young people to understand that they will be supported and that support will be provided throughout their volunteering journey. There's also a real opportunity from the data for volunteer involving organisations to offer taster sessions. Young people have said they would just like to see what volunteering was like. What if we offered taster sessions to those young people and they became volunteers? So there's real tangible things that we can act on from the data, which is really, really encouraging. And if we move on to the next slide. So that was a bit of a whistle-stop tour of our findings. So I'll just go over the key findings. So as mentioned right back at the first slide, we saw a 12 percentage point decrease in formal youth participation between 2019. But as I mentioned, we cannot forget that that's 114,000 young people contributing just shy of 10 million hours of help. Should also add here that formal youth participation rates are 10% higher for young people than for adults. So there's something there. The formal participation rates for young people vary quite a lot by age. So we saw that for 17 to 18-year-olds, it was remarkably high at 68%. And we saw that it was lower for those that have just entered and throughout their secondary school journey from 11 to 16. It showed how resilient formal volunteering has been in terms of those of school leaving age. Our finding shows that girls and boys are equally likely to volunteer formally and informally in 2022. Historically, we've seen trends which continue in adult volunteering, where girls' participation has been higher than boys, but now they're equal. For the first time, we've seen girls volunteering more than boys in physical activity, sports and exercise. We're still seeing, unfortunately, disparities around deprivation, with young people living in the most deprived areas of Scotland being less likely to volunteer than those in other deprivation profiles. But for informal volunteering, there's no variation. We need to look at why. We saw that young people with long-term health conditions have higher formal and informal participation rates than those without. This is really encouraging, and it's a reverse of the volunteering trends we see for disabled adults in Scotland. What can we learn from young people? For faith groups, we saw that volunteering by young people of Christian faith had declined quite dramatically. We saw a 17 percentage point decrease in formal volunteering and a 15 percentage point decrease in informal volunteering. And we need to do a little bit more work to understand why. We saw a decrease in the proportion of young people citing all well-being and career benefits, again an area for concern and something we need to closely monitor. We saw that the most important thing that would help encourage young people to start volunteering or do more is the ability to do it with their friends. And we're reflecting that this might reflect a greater insecurity amongst young people and the comfort of engaging in volunteering with friends rather than on their own. And that might be another COVID's hangover where young people were on their own for so long and they really want activities where they can interact with their friends and other young people. And I think most importantly, we can see real opportunities to increase formal and informal youth volunteer participation by incorporating the influencing factors into policy and future recruitment campaigns. And my last slide is just say thank you to you all for listening to all of our stats. Please have a look at the report, which you've been sent a link to. And if anyone thinks of any questions later on, just drop me a little email. Thanks, Alan.
Thanks, Debbie. I'm going to stop sharing because we're going to open this up to first the panel and then I think to a Q&A. So while I do that, what I'd maybe ask the audience to be just thinking about is just some of those findings from a Scotland perspective and think about it in your own context. So get your questions ready. But while you do that, I'll maybe put a question to the panel members as it stands. So this is probably a more general question because it's, you know, a lot of findings in there. Actually, there's an awful lot of data in this survey. So the question really is, which of the findings resonate most with your experience of youth volunteering in your country? And that's going to the panel members. But if I maybe kick that off with Denise, first of all.
Thanks, Alan. Actually, there was quite a lot in there that resonated with the findings that we have in Northern Ireland. The finding around doing the volunteering with friends is something that we've seen before in data that we have for Northern Ireland. And in a way, it doesn't surprise me because taking a step into a new organisation or a new relationship is always a wee bit daunting. And it's particularly for that age group, I think it's really nice if young people can volunteer together. And it also adds to that whole social thing, which is really, really important in volunteering. So in a sense, I wasn't surprised to see that. I think where sometimes the point of struggle around that is that sometimes organisations are not that geared up to having little groups of volunteers, you know, because I know just sort of anecdotally at a local level, sometimes they're worried maybe that they're going to carry on as a Northern Irish expression that might not be well understood internationally, that they're not going to take it seriously if they're doing it in a group. And so sometimes roles are very much about one person on one person. And I think organisations are missing a trick there when there's an opportunity to have groups of volunteers together. It's Debbie's point about tasters and things like that. I think there's a softer way in for people. And I think there's really valuable information in that data about trying to kind of lower some of those barriers around confidence. Confidence has come through quite strongly in surveys for us over the years for young people specifically. And I suppose the other thing that struck me there was about the fall off in sports physical activity based volunteering. We haven't seen that in our data, and it'd be interesting to see if that is something that starts to come through. The faith one is something we've seen, particularly in the adults data. But that's not surprising because church membership and church growth is actually falling. And so I think what you're seeing there is a bit of a kind of knock on from that wider piece around faith-based volunteering in communities in the UK. But that was just my view. I'm sure other panel members have more to say than me.
Really interesting, particularly that last point there on participation and faith-based activities just generally affecting volunteering. Maybe we'll get the same perspective from Costa Rica. Maria, what did you pick up from the research?
Yes, thank you so much for the question, but most important for the information and data that help us to think about volunteering in a more informed capacity. In the case of the volunteer program at the University of Costa Rica, I think it's very interesting to point out that there is important influence on participation, but not on part of family members, but most of the part of the peers. As Denise was saying, is the need to participate in a group, that it's important. So among students, the networks are important to generate and bring new volunteers to the system that the university is offering. Another aspect that the study shows and resonates with what we have been able to observe is with respect of the benefits, because although there is a general interest among university students that volunteering can enrich their academic curriculum, there is a growing interest in the other benefits that are evident after the pandemic. Is very evident that there is a specific interest in the positive effects on mental health and general well-being that volunteers can have on people. And this evidence may not be new, but it's new for us and to understand and take into account as a university to help students with this impact after the pandemic.
It's really interesting, in particular, again mentioning groups again, but the whole benefits question is really important. It's interesting that young people are taking it into their own hands as well to seek out those benefits. Ahmed, for you, what did you see in Jordan?
Thank you, Alan, and thank you, IAVE, for inviting us to yet again a very fascinating panel discussion. I always take these opportunities to learn more about the sector that we're in. That it continues to grow in importance in this day and age. Yet at the same time, the fact that research is going on, it's like finding a little piece of like a nugget of gold. It's that important. The thing that struck me the most, I think, was it was mentioned very clearly as a possible reason for the decline, or maybe for the types of responses that were happening, where the impact on psychological health of young people, maybe COVID had influence. So the one thing that I would contrast that with the Jordanian experience. I would say that as a consequence of COVID, it actually it popularized volunteering. So that's the sense that we got here, and that was reflected on just the number of volunteers registering on the National Volunteering Platform that just went up, and the number of entities registering to sort of attract more volunteers that also went up. And that also, cross-cuts with the fact that the number one responders when there were lockdowns and all that stuff, it was the volunteers. And maybe we were fortunate enough that there was a big light shed on all these efforts. So, kind of popular, it was a cool thing. The second thing was that we also felt that young people were getting a greater sense of, self-worth. Definitely confidence was definitely there. So it's almost like they're finding themselves in this field that they can actually influence the world around them. And that, speaks to an even broader question, that how much do the cultural factors affect, the way people perceive and define volunteering? Because for us, when there was talk about what are the major influences, why would people want to volunteer in the future? So number one, in the Scotland research, which was really fascinating, it was the ability to volunteer with friends, the social aspect. In our very, very small online survey that we conducted a couple of years back, it was actually the opposite. The top reason for volunteering was people said that they loved it, either because they loved it or it was a religious duty or a national duty. And then it was skill building. I think, 50% was like self-motivation, 20% roughly was like skill building, followed by people who wanted recognition, they wanted to look good. And then the last one, I think it was around 8%, was to expand their social circle. So that is also interesting for me to explore and look at further. And I'll end with this. Thank you.
Thank you. That's fascinating. I'm going to move on to Cooley. Cooley, the experience in Uganda
you so much, Alan, and thank you for sharing us the research. I'm really grateful about this research, and I'm feeling motivated when I see the impact of volunteers, of youth volunteers in Scotland. In Uganda, we have realized the increase in informal volunteering. What I've realized in the research is that in most cases, if you want to increase your volunteering capacity, you must put yourself into someone's feet. So in Uganda, there are most people who succeed in volunteering, they feel it themselves. If you want maybe to feel the community where you're coming from, you must feel it. If you see in health, if the health is not adequate, you must see it yourself and feel it. So I'm seeing much of volunteering in Uganda being informal than formal one. So most youth volunteers are participating in the informal sector. You find them helping in their gardens, helping in churches. You find them doing well at the hospitals, and this is more of informal, which most people, most experts in volunteering have neglected in Uganda. They only concentrate on the formal sector and neglect the informal sector. And this is what I'm learning from your research. Another thing I've learned that in Uganda we are streamlining the education sector, and in streamlining the education sector, we are moving away from theoretical studies to more practical studies. So I'm looking at most parents of the young volunteers have always encouraged their children, their adolescents, to first go for apprenticeship, go for on-job training, and this is encouraging them to perfect in their volunteering journey. So most parents and guardians are the enforcers of this volunteering strategy in Uganda. More so looking at even the opinion leaders, the church religious leaders, they are encouraging the young people to participate in volunteering, which is most important to me. And the other thing I've learned from the research is that the youth are looking at diversifying their skills in volunteering. If you look at in Uganda, many youth basically go for volunteering to acquire the skills. You remember when someone is diversified with the skills, is able to participate, is able to do more at job and perfect with the work he or she is doing. And this is what I'm looking at. Then in Uganda, you see in the African context, most women are more empathized with the issues than men. So we see women participating more in volunteering than men because they have the sympathy, they are honest, and they feel the impact of doing something at their best. That's what I'm looking at, Alan. Thank you.
Thank you, Cooley. And I think that point on skills is really important. I don't know, Debbie, if you want to comment a little bit. I mean, the one thing that struck me was the 17 to 18-year-olds, and I just wonder if there's something there. Is that motivation?
Yeah, I think one encouraging thing just from the last panelist comment is that for young people in Scotland, we're seeing equal participation in young boys and girls. But when we move into adult participation, there's well-established trends that it's women that are volunteering more than men. So that experience certainly resonates. And I think from the nodding heads, it resonates with a lot of the panel. I think the experience in Costa Rica is really interesting around the group participation. I think informal volunteering as well was mentioned quite a lot by the last speaker. Informal volunteering and what we call mutual aid volunteering, which was kind of joining Facebook groups and stuff during COVID to help your local community. We've never seen anything like it. It was absolutely incredible. So yeah, I think informal volunteering's got more of a role to play in future as well. And I think it's really interesting the difference that we see between different countries and what encourages people to volunteer. I find it really interesting, and it is something that we're doing some work on with a partner, but more on the adult side, is around religion, and people don't necessarily see volunteering as volunteering. It is a part of what they do as a religion. So I think that's really interesting to see that coming through in other surveys as one of the top reasons that people volunteer. So yeah, lots of food for thought and lots of, it's nice to hear that we're seeing shared experiences, but it's also good to hear where it's different, because then we can steal your ideas or borrow them.
Well, the difference is why we're here, and this is what we want to hear as well. It's where we see those differences. I mean, the pressure we have obviously on participation, that kind of pressure down on levels of adult and also youth volunteering participation, but it's not the same everywhere. So when we think about things like global pandemics, the context is well, the issue is the same, but how that then translates into different regions is very different, and I think that's important to understand. How are we doing in terms of Q&A? So I'll ask this from Jay Varga. Do any of you have any data or experience on young people volunteering in decision-making positions? Can you tell us about that? How did you get young people in, and what are the benefits and challenges? And I don't know if that is related to maybe the lack or the need to get more young people into decision making, and things like trustees on boards and so on, where we know that there are issues about young people being able to get onto those boards, although there's still an appetite from young people to be involved in at those levels, but there just seems to be blockers. So I'm going to put that across. I think we'll go in the same order and keep it quite organised. But if we can go with Denise again, can you say anything about this issue?
Thanks for the question, Jay. But no, we don't have any really clear data on that, I wouldn't say, in Northern Ireland. But I would sense just from talking to organisations that there is an issue in terms of being able to allow young people those access to decision making. But we have seen a clear shift in policy at a youth level over the last couple of years around that real emphasis on youth-led work. So I think that will begin to feed through, but I think it's still early days, and we are still seeing that there is an issue in getting young people onto board. Some of that's structural though, because I mean legally in the UK you can't serve as a trustee until you're 18. So there are sort of structural barriers in there, and I don't see those changing. But I think organisations can do quite a wee bit around kind of youth panels and different ways of engaging. The other thing I think that does sometimes cause a bit of an issue there as well, and just from our own experience, we've had a number of kind of goes at trying to really integrate young people onto our own board, and what we have found is, while they're great and they're a fantastic asset, they don't stay as long because their lives are changing so quickly. They get a new job or they go off to do a new course, and so you might have them for a little while, but then they're heading on. That's not a bad thing. That's great actually, because for us it adds value while they're there. For them it helps them to build skills, and I think that's all valuable. One of the things I did want to just reflect on about the skills building thing, it is hugely important for young people, but one of the pieces of research that we've done in the last number of years really showed that young people, while they do learn these skills, they're not particularly good at actually talking about them at interviews for colleges and jobs. So actually there's a job of work for us in the sector kind of to do to help young people to understand the value of what they're learning, and to then be able to translate that into the workplace or into college applications and things, because they're not likely to actually think about some of those skills in the past. And that's kind of shown again and again and again in sort of follow-up and surveys that we've done with young people. So
thanks, Denise. That's very helpful. And just to pick up on one of the points you raised there, just about there's other ways for young people to get into those decision-making areas. I think Kathleen's comment on youth committees to make small grant awards, that's been a very positive experience for them. So there's some good things been shared. Move across to Maria. Young people into decision-making areas. I'd imagine this is something you've got some experience in terms of the university.
Yes, well, the volunteer program of the University of Costa Rica has been in existence for 26 years now. I think this demonstrates the interest of the state and the public university that the students can contribute and give back to the country. This shows that the university is so much more than to transfer knowledge to achieve a degree. It implies social impact in research, development, and social transformation. I think that maintaining and consolidating a solid volunteer program should be a part of an integral university. Initially, the program focused on an ecological volunteer because also of the Costa Rica green aspect, and therefore they had a greater proximity to the students in the science careers. And this was a clear link with a more integral education experience. As time went on, the projects also expanded, often proposed by the students themselves. They changed the program and they completed the portfolio, maintaining the ecological interest, but also added a more social one, and diversify the number of participants and programs that they could participate. I believe that adaptability is a very important lesson that we can offer, since generating the student population is a very important challenge of the survival of any program in that sense. So offering the possibility of personal growth, networking, and everything that implies an added value to the student. I think also another aspect that is important to highlight is then in a general academic aspect, students that are part of the volunteer program are also excellent students, so they prioritize their multiple responsibilities and also develop higher organizations and time management skills that are very relevant in this kind of scenario. In closing, I think it's important to share an economic aspect that we take into account, because we try to have an equal participation, and we are a public university, so social classes are different in the students. So the program in the university gives an economic endowment to the students that need it, to have travel assistance and provide them also with food while they are volunteering. So for the university, it's essential that students, regardless of their economical status, can participate in all the experience that the university has to offer. Thank you.
Thanks, Maria. Just a very short follow-up. Do you see a drop-off post-university? Is that something that you measure at all in terms of whether those students go on to continue volunteering when they get a job and move on?
We do try to follow up after they graduate, and we have both of the experience. We've seen students that they don't volunteer anymore, and we see others that continue or also work in different volunteer programs in the country.
Great, thank you. Ahmed, I'm going to change it up a little bit. So obviously in Scotland, parents and guardians were an important route into volunteers. Teachers were actually another. Can you say something about the role of influencers and encouraging youth volunteering in Jordan? And maybe any tips that you've got for folks on the call?
Sure. So that was definitely an eye-opener. Just going through that report. So clearly, everyone would expect, like, parents, teachers, all that, but from our experience, the number one motivator, the number one influencer would be peers. It would be peer groups, whether it's people working collaboratively together, pulling each other out, or whether it's a form of positive competition. They're doing it, so I'd like to do the same thing as well. And that's quite honestly the base of our approach here in Jordan, to try and push volunteering through. Now, one thing that we are lacking, and I expect many countries to share this, is types of programs or classes or courses at the earlier levels of education. So we're talking primary, secondary school. A lot of times we find that those do not exist. In Jordan, you are only technically required to do community service as a prerequisite for graduating from universities. That's it. So another thing that we are working on, it's sort of the national framework, the infrastructure, the policies to make sure that number one, there is a common definition for what constitutes community service. There is a standard to recognize what types of activities are and aren't. Some type of certification, which we are pushing through the national platform. And we're trying to standardize this across universities. And once you get into like government and policy, it takes a while. So that's happening. The second thing is, and I was quite impressed by the experience of, I believe it was New Zealand, where they have a fantastic setup, a fantastic program. I think it was the Volunteer Army, where they provide toolkits to educators, to teachers. They provide, very light training, and they have a type of a national competition at the school level, at the, the regional level, at the national level, to encourage student volunteering. It's absolutely low cost. It is very lean. And it is the thing that pushes all youth to compete every single year to get that badge. So that is also something that I would encourage others to consider. The last thing, which is actually supported by research everywhere, you really need to make sure that the first interaction that young people have with volunteering is a positive one. And I really need to thank Denise for that one. We recognize that a lot of times people would go do what would be described as informal volunteering. They try something out, it doesn't work out, it's too difficult, maybe someone tells them off, and that is the end of the journey. So that's also something that we need to make sure that is identified. Thank you.
Ahmed, thank you for that. Debbie, take a note. We need to speak to New Zealand if we want to build youth volunteering further into that curriculum. And there is something there about the age when volunteers become or young people become aware of volunteering, and those key transitions are important. I think we even miss a trick actually with our Saltire Awards. It starts at age 12, but young people actually come into school at age 8. Simple as just moving it back a year. I'm going to move on again to Cooley, and this is an interesting one for me because I think this is coming through in a range of areas, just around youth activism and how important it is for young people to really get a real sense of the difference they're making as well, and kind of not wait, not hang around, actually demand that change to some extent. So for me, maybe the question is, what's the relationship in Uganda between youth activism and volunteering? And again, if there are any lessons that you can think for others, that'd be really helpful, Cooley.
Oh, thank you, Alan, and thank you very much to my fellow panelists. I think in Uganda, the youth activists, there is no way you can separate them from volunteering. Because what we emphasizing for
A few issues, Cooley, with your connection.
volunteering.
I wonder, Cooley, can we suggest you turn your video off?
Yes.
No, I don't think Cooley's coming through. I
do
don't know,
much
Gal,
work
can you?
for their communities. That's the more activism for having a vibrant volunteering team. So that's what we.
Gal, are you picking up the same issues with Cooley's connection?
Yes, yeah, I
Yeah.
think it must be an unstable connection on his end.
I wonder, Cooley, if we can come back to you, and we'll move on to another question in the meantime. Do we have any more Q&A questions coming through? We're kind of leaning lots of comments, but nobody wants to just jump in with a question. So
There is one in the chat, Alan, from Tico at 10 a.m. How do you find financial resources for youth volunteering projects? And is any international donors or funders?
maybe I'll just open that up to the panel. So the tricky question of funding, Ahmed.
Thank you. Yeah, the age-old question of funding. It really does depend on the context, on the level of activity of international donors, on the interest and alignment of interest between local government, international donors. I think there is a lot to be said to the role that national volunteering organizations play in shaping the agenda, in advocating and in accessing those funds. One of the bigger challenges is, you know, you're competing with a lot of other priorities. And a lot of the times we hear these things regarding, you know, the economy, unemployment, all of that, health scares. So building partnerships, that's a whole separate thing. What I can say is, I know that in Jordan, volunteering is primarily supported by, you know, UNICEF. UNICEF is our fantastic partner. It's been funding the national platform for the last 4 years. So there's that. But due to the success of all of the volunteering activities, now the government is stepping in and earmarking some budgets at a very local level, very small amounts, to help volunteers conduct their own activities, like very small, like micro. We're speaking like tens to hundreds of dollars. So there is a trend that if you can do well enough and demonstrate a solid case for supporting volunteerism, you can actually go up to your government and be like, we don't need international donors, you need to earmark that. And yeah, I just love this part of our work when in volunteering. You know, where's the money?
A question is asked often. Maria?
Yes, was in this case, in our case, we have a public budget for the volunteer program, but also for us it's very important to maintain strong relationships with our partners, for example, national parks, or civil society organizations. So they have also to reserve budget to guide us into the national parks, people that are going to receive us and everything. So it's important to maintain this relationship because it also needs resources for that.
Thank you, Maria. Cooley?
Also I have some contribution about the funding. In Uganda, the way we are doing it, we make sure we instill the practical skills among the youth. So when they have the practical skills, let us say if someone has learned tailoring and we have our products on our market, so we have a social media page where their products are posted. So we create local resource mobilization than basing on the international funders. Because at times we have faced challenges with the international funders. When the grant is off, then you have no more volunteers. You cannot facilitate them in the field, you cannot have them at work, and then you find yourself not working very well. So one of our strategies is making sure we have local resource mobilization. And through that, we encourage our volunteers to do local products. So when we market them, we have a lot of resources in the pool, and it can facilitate them to do much more when they are going in the field. Alongside that, we do more for teaching these volunteers on resource mobilization and fundraising. So that is more of a mentorship that we do to them and coaching them on how they can mobilize the resources on international funders. but much of our emphasis, we put it local. Can you please have your resources at a local area? Thank you.
Thank you, Cooley. And that's interesting because there's that dynamic of local versus national and building a business case in a higher level, policy level, or just finding that kind of local need and bringing resources to bear. Cooley, can I ask you to continue, because I know we missed your previous response around youth activism. While your connection is steady, let's go for that answer if you can.
Oh, thank you, Alan. I was explaining that in most cases, there is no way you can separate youth activism and volunteering in Uganda. All of them go hand in hand, because what the strategy we have nationally is that can you have all the youth participating in volunteering? So whoever youth that that looks for advocating these youth to do well is looking at volunteering, which is the major concern for every Ugandan youth. Therefore, we look at this impact. For example, we have seen real impacts and real change. When you see the youth activism, they look at the change. Can we have a real impact in our community, in our rural areas? And they focus on changing the economic status and more so to volunteering. So youth activism have always given support to have a positive change, to have a positive impact in the work they are doing in different areas. That is through free trainings, awareness campaigns, like online platforms and organizing physical meetings. So youth activism have helped youth volunteers in doing all that. We have also seen in creating the unique passion and the dedication for volunteering. These youth activists also make sure the youth have the passion to work, the dedication to volunteer in their different areas. And therefore they have created this self-esteem and inspirations to different communities where these volunteers comes from. And we have also seen that in activism and volunteering, there is new and creative ideas. You cannot advocate for what you think it is real, is working everywhere. So everywhere in volunteering, there is innovation. Believe me, if you cannot be innovative in whatever work you are volunteering in, then you have lost the step. So we look at this youth activists enforcing the creativity and new ideas among the youth volunteers. So therefore, to me, I just look at them that we cannot separate the two. All of them go hand in hand with the other. We have seen also creating great leaders. In youth activism, they have encouraged youth volunteer leaders in our different communities through advocacy, helping them to build their mission, helping them to build their focus and the beliefs that they are able to do with. Even they have helped in changing the core values of volunteers. What is it that you really believe in as a youth volunteer? So we have even seen that in raising the voices for the future. The youth activists have also raised the voices of the future volunteers, youth volunteers, through youth knowledge development, developing talents, and beliefs, encouraging the beliefs of youth volunteers to advocate for more and having fun with their communities. That is where we have seen the activism being where it can work with alongside the volunteering. So there are some lessons I've learned in this, and these lessons can help to say in Uganda, we have seen many youth activism is not welcomed by everyone. You find that every person can even dismiss it, can even not go hand in hand with it, cannot even agree with it without even a single reason. And these youth activists will try to explain, and none of the elders will be able to understand what they are meaning. So this diminishes the youth involvement and new perspectives for the youth volunteers. And another lesson I've learned in Uganda is that These youth activists have helped youth volunteers to avoid the discrimination, let us say in education, in sex, let us say political, social, and environmental issues. So they have gone away from the discrimination within their work. Thank you, Alan.
Thank you, Cooley. Some really powerful examples there. And we mentioned earlier on about young people in decision-making environments, but actually those young people, those youth activists you're shaping your future leaders through that activity. So it's really powerful. And also hitting some of those cultural issues as well. So there are lessons, I think, for others as well, because young people can be seen in a very particular way, and I think we need to change how we view young people as well, and those stereotypes that still persist. So I'm actually going to kind of move back across, and I'm going to ask Denise a question, because this is something that we are facing in Scotland in particular, and it is part of our agenda around volunteering for all. But we're seeing lots of young volunteers from the most deprived communities and fewer young people from more deprived communities in Scotland volunteering. I just wondered, what's your perspective in Northern Ireland? And again, are there lessons that we can learn and share from that?
Thanks, Alan. Yeah, ours picture is the same. And actually, I was looking back at data from 2017, 2019, and it's telling the same story in Northern Ireland, that we have fewer volunteers, young people volunteering from less well-off backgrounds, and that seems to be a sticky trend, to be honest, although it's also a sticky trend with adults. So it's not just for young people. And I'm also reflecting as well that volunteering is a learned behavior. We learn it in the home very often. And I suspect that if adults are not around young people, because I mean, again, if you look at your survey, parental involvement is huge in terms of encouraging young people to volunteers, and if they're not seeing that being role modeled in their family life, then they're much less likely, I think, to pick up on it. I think other things that we're seeing very much at the moment is the trend around cost of living. I mean, volunteer expenses is a huge issue for us in Northern Ireland. Organisations that are not paying volunteer expenses are definitely struggling more to recruit volunteers. And I think that if you haven't got that level playing field, people from less well-off backgrounds will be less able to engage with volunteering. And that's just the reality. I mean, people are also making choices about what to do in their spare time. And if there's an option between taking a paid job, and the job market is strong at the moment, so to get paid work is relatively straightforward in Northern Ireland at the moment. Even kind of waitressing or sort of entry level paid work is available, and very available. So therefore I think people from less well-off backgrounds are probably voting with their feet. I suppose one of the real sadnesses for me is that you can see through the research, and actually, you know, talking to young people, the huge benefits that there are to volunteering. And yet often the young people who need those benefits most in terms of building their networks, building their skills, all of those access things, are not necessarily understanding or even seeing volunteering could be for them. I do think schools are a huge, for us, I think schools are a route in this way. But I do slightly worry about this curriculum piece. We have volunteering in Learning for Life and Work in Northern Ireland, and quite honestly, it's not well regarded. So it's there, young people are taught about it, but usually it's a very add-on thing. It's not a positive focus. It depends entirely on the teacher who's taking the lead in that. And if you've got somebody good who really understands the difference volunteering can make, it makes a huge impact on the young people who are hearing that message. If you have somebody who really doesn't get it and doesn't see the benefits of volunteering, they're not going to be imparting that to the young people in their kind of care. So I think having it in the curriculum is good on one level because it's potentially available for everybody, but it's all about the quality of how that's delivered, and I think the quality is very variable. So for me, it's a huge challenge. It's not one that we're doing particularly well in Northern Ireland. And I think it's something that, you know, we do need to think more about. I am definitely struck though by the family connection. And I don't think in the UK, family volunteering is something we talk enough about. I was really struck when we were at the conference, the IAVI conference in the UAE, about the importance of family volunteering. And we are not doing that at a very good level in the UK, I don't think. So I think there is more to do in this area. So thanks for the question.
Thanks, Denise. So it's not just the educational piece, it's actually bringing volunteering into the home in a bigger way as well. Debbie, there is a question from Lorraine, which picks up on, similar to what you've said there, Denise, around the evidence of educational programmes, and you've got a kind of mixed view, Denise. I wonder if I can pass that across to Debbie. Is there evidence of educational programmes making an impact on participation? Are you aware of anything in terms of good practice, or I suppose anything out there, I suppose, that can maybe help folks sort of take the next steps through this?
Unfortunately not. I think it's very mixed picture in Scotland. I think some schools are very good at encouraging young people to volunteer. I really like what Ahmed said about potentially having kind of online type maybe modules and that schools can access, and maybe if the wider sector worked on resources like that for schools, then that would be something that we could use so we don't get the discrepancies, because I completely get what Denise said, that, you know, if you get a teacher who's had positive volunteer experience, who's passionate about it, their pupils are going to get a very, very different message to somebody who doesn't like volunteering for whatever reason. Maybe they had a bad experience 30 years ago and they're still holding on to it, but those young people won't get the same benefit. So maybe it's about the sector providing some kind of resource and collating the evidence and looking at the survey and saying, okay, this is what would encourage young people. Let's show them stories of that. And maybe it's videos and online resources that are played as part of, I mean, that's what I got at school, but it's going back a wee while ago. But I think it was in modern studies, which is probably called something completely different now, but volunteering was part of that. And we got videos and stuff about young people that had volunteered, and then we got the opportunity to sign up to try it to see if we wanted. And I think, like, from speaking to kind of young people that I know that are that age through friends and stuff, it's just some schools it's not mentioned. And where it is mentioned in Scotland, I think too much focus is on the university application process. So and I think that's what we see in 16 to 18-year-olds. It's something to get on a university application, and not, we need to make kind of teachers more aware, especially now with the mental health crisis in young people in Scotland and across the world. We need to make teachers aware that young people can benefit, their mental health can benefit, they can go back to having fun after COVID, they can engage with people, and there's career benefits for young people as well. I think we've got a role as a sector to educate the educators so that they do a better job of educating our young people, because they're our future of volunteering. Sorry, that sounded like a party political broadcast.
It's a good point, and probably not a bad point to end on, because I remember the 2019 study. Maybe it's changed a little bit, but we had fairly high level of participation in the most deprived area and fairly high level of participation in the least deprived area. It was a kind of U, and that was partly because it was seen as a gap. It was seen as a filler for those kids that weren't going to attain. Volunteering was in there to fill time. So again, it wasn't used in the most positive way. So there is something there about educating the educators. I think that's probably where we need to get to, rather than there being a ready-baked solution. I'm afraid, Lorraine, is probably going to be one where we have to work with the education sector and create that solution. I'm just going to share the slides again and take us through just to the end. I'd like to thank all of the panelists before I do that. I just think that's been fantastic. The input from Cooley in Uganda, absolutely incredible in terms of what your young volunteers are doing, and I really genuinely would love to know more about those experiences that they're having as well, because I think there's a lot to learn there. To Ahmed and Jordan, and yeah, and in terms of what salient points you've brought to the debate as well, and Maria in Costa Rica, and Denise, I think Northern Ireland and Scotland, certainly there's a lot of similarity there, where there's maybe differences in other areas. And thanks again, Debbie. So we'll just, if I can just share my screen again and take us through into the final slides. So I think Wendy will ask me to do this anyway, but this is just to highlight the next in the youth volunteering series. So there is going to be the youth volunteering and youth activism, exploring how volunteering empowers and builds leadership to affect change, on September the 12th. That's coming up, so certainly sign up for that one. And then there's another great session, I think, on youth volunteering and social change, which is coming up on October the 3rd. So we're a few minutes early. Wendy, a few final words from yourself before we head.
Thank you, Alan, and thank you for keeping to time. We can't ask any more of a moderator than that. It's been a really, really interesting session. Because I think Avi is struck by the fact that youth volunteering is such an issue for our network of volunteer involving organizations and volunteering leadership organizations. And therefore, the more we learn and the more we can do and the more we can share, it is so important. And your research has clearly initiated quite a lot of thought. And, and I think that's what it's about. It's about sharing what we have learned from evidence and how we can use that. So thanks to all the panel members, and thanks for that global perspective. Thanks to Volunteer Scotland for initiating the dialogue. And I'm sure we will be continuing the dialogue in relation to youth volunteering all the way through this year, and I'm sure into next year as well, because it's so vital. If we're to continue volunteering into the future, we need the next generation to be really, really motivated and enabled to make a difference. So thank you, everyone, and thank you. Thank you, Alan. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Wendy. And thanks, everyone, for coming along.